But how do you feel about Tinubu's removal of the fuel subsidies? Because you go on you read the Financial Times and they'll tell you, oh, this is amazing, it's working so well, liberalization, this is the path to prosperity.
Yeah, to the
But
point I'm making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then on the ground, it's a very different story.
It's different. It's difficult on the ground. And I remember before he came on board, in fact, 3 years before he came on board, which was he became president in 2023, May of 2023. I attended so many meetings, with some of these international institutions. Some of them invited us to be part of presentations and give feedback. And I remember in about 2 or 3 of those meetings, one of the things they were arguing for is the removal of fuel subsidy, right? It was very clear in the policy statement. And in fact, they said that if Nigeria removed subsidy, inflation would only increase by about 1 percentage point or 2 percentage points, and then inflation would drop back.
Wow.
In fact, that was the message they were preaching. And I know many times I spoke against it, and I said, look, you guys are missing out some important facts about the Nigerian economy. The people who rely on fuel for transport, right? You need to factor in the people that will be left out of these policies well enough. Not just about doing some funny models and then you say inflation will increase by just 1 percentage point and thereafter it will go back to its normal range or trend. So when the president came on board, the first thing he did was to announce the removal of fuel subsidy. He made a popular statement that subsidy is gone. And right from that day, right, everybody started adjusting. Like you go to the filling station and then you see the price of fuel had gone up, fluctuating up, down. You just don't know what's happening. So fuel that was somewhere around 200 naira a liter now sells for something around 900 naira a liter. So you could imagine the impact on the people, right? And I thought that there were issues relating to corruption as far as subsidies were concerned, right? So the people who would, because it's fuel is subsidized, people would take advantage of that and import fuel and say they imported XYZ liters. Meanwhile, they imported less than that just so they can get money out of it, right? So part of the idea of removing subsidy was to tackle the corruption and all that, which in a way I thought maybe we could have done better in actually tracing where the money is going to rather than outright removal, right? But to the point on the role of the international institutions, right? When some of these decisions are made, it's easy for a government to point to research that has been done by these institutions and say, well, they only said inflation will go up by 1 percentage point and use that as a justification to remove fuel subsidy. So whether or not that influenced the decision is still debatable, but in a way it does, because you can argue that there's some evidence behind your action. And guess what happened to inflation? Skyrocketed to even over 30%. Inflation that was somewhere around 18% or even less some years ago, right? Within a space of just 2 years, it's gone to over 30%. And anyways, it's been rebased now. They've changed the methodology and they said inflation is now 24% or so. But even at that, it's still high. It's not 1 percentage point that was earlier said by these institutions. And you see that play out across different sectors. So on how I feel, I think before you make a very sensitive decision on fuel, right, I think you should or we should have given it even more thought because of the impact that it's going to have on majority of citizens. And as we all know, inflation is the worst enemy of the poor, and not just the poor, even the middle income earners, right? So before that, in 2022, about 133 million Nigerians were multidimensionally poor, right? And then so with an impact of subsidy removal, and we've not invested in social security as much as we should in terms of the number of households that it covers. The refineries, were not operational. Even the Dangote refinery were not operational. Was not operational then. So many things that should have been in place were not given intense consideration before that significant action was made, knowing fully well that subsidy is a very contested issue. So I thought perhaps if we had done that, put some of these things in place. In fact, what we argued, we wrote a report and we had argued at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and we had argued for a phased removal of subsidy, that you can mitigate the impact as you go along and decide how to approach it in the best possible way. That's what we advocated for. But the outright removal, it's a tough one for people to take in, and it's really, if we were to constitute poverty survey now, in fact, I think a lot more Nigerians would have fallen into poverty. But the government is also, I think, trying to alleviate the situation. But to be honest, the scale of the problem is huge.
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't they sort of advocate for a more of a gradual reduction of subsidies? Like, why did they want to just immediately remove it?
I thought, in fact, I heard, I'm not sure if this, but I heard that it was not in the president's speech on the day because he was announced on the day he was inaugurated. And I heard his speech had been prepared, and then he was speaking, and then he just left the speech and said subsidy is gone. so that statement was what changed. And when you say things like that, you can't go back to say, I meant, in fact, when that statement was made, some petrol stations had to shut down.
Wow.
Because the fear they knew that this is an opportunity for them to raise prices. And the next day or two, prices went up.